Late September and this football season, it's hitting its stride. This is Louisiana vs. Orioles Recruit That Boot. I'm Jarrett Roser. He's Sam Spiegelman. And we're at a point of the season where a lot of the commitment type news isn't hitting as fast and furiously as it has been for the last several months over the summer and a few lingering into the season, but there's still an awful lot going on. And so we're going to hit on a variety of things, maybe a couple notes on a few of Louisiana's seniors who are hearing from some other schools. Are they on flip watch or not? A couple of 27 and 28 prospects who are on the rise, but also looking at some notable developments at the college level, both in terms of the recruiting calendar and talking about some Louisiana standouts who have gone on to the next level and how those guys are doing. Sam, we'll get into all of that. And, spoiler alert for folks, Arch Manning is going to be a topic of discussion today, as he is on most podcasts and television stations and whatnot throughout this September to start this season. But before we get into Arch, how is Sam? How are you doing today, man?
Oh, Sam is doing just fine. Another day in the life. 5 weeks into being a parent, thinking of maybe not starting a book, but maybe a pamphlet, 50 pages on what I've learned so far. Probably stop it there, since I can't even get past 2 pages of a Google Doc for an actual book. So pamphlet might even be ambitious, but it's been great. The recruiting cycle never fails. Like as you just said, most of the 2026 class is already done, but there's some leaks and cracks in the doors. So that's been fun to monitor as these games get a little bit more significant, a little bit more meaningful each week. And of course, when these game day visits start, we're not only focusing on the 2026 class, but this is becoming prime time for a lot of these top 2027s, and of course the initial phase of visits for the 2028s, as schools get a look at these guys for the first time as they're enjoying terrific sophomore seasons. So there's really no shortage of content. It's been a fun season so far, and I feel like we still have a lot more fun ahead of us.
Yeah, no doubt. And we'll get into some more of those 26, 27, and 28 guys, after we get through sort of the main topic, which will be turning back the clock a little bit to that 23 class and a young man, Arch Manning, who has been headline news on a national scale in a lot of ways since he was an underclassman back at Isidore Newman. This is his first year really taking the helm of that Texas offense with Quinn Ewers off to the NFL. And it started rough, obviously, that trip to Ohio State. And guess what? Trips to Ohio State start rough for an awful lot of folks, whether they're Arch Manning or Texas or anybody else. And they've won 3 straight now, 3-1, still a top 10 team. And he's been under the microscope his entire life. And so it's no surprise now, as the Texas Longhorn starting quarterback, that microscope has been really sharply focused on him in the start of this season for a team with national title aspirations. And there have been some learning curves and bumps and whatnot, but as we look now 4 games into the season, going into this bye week, and then a huge one next week heading to Florida, what's kind of your early feel on Arch and how optimistic you continue to be potentially? What positives you maybe take from him seeming to get right a little bit against Sam Houston, or if you have any concerns, because I know some folks have been brutal in their criticisms so far. And as with most things, I think a little bit over the top in either direction.
Yeah, I think you hit it right in the head. I think anyone thinking that he was going to come in out of the gates swinging 300 yards, 4 touchdowns against the Ohio State defense that has the number 1 safety in the country, one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, young talent at every single position, from the defensive line to the linebacking core, which are all 4- and 5-star kids that I used to cover, to this secondary group, which I know that we on this podcast tend to give Corey Raymond the benefit of the doubt with DBU, but Ohio State has quite the reputation for it, especially with their group in 2025 this season. I think that he fared pretty decent against Ohio State, all things considered. It wasn't like the offense on either side of that ball, between Julian Sayin making his first start against a talented Texas defense and Arch against a talented Ohio State defense. Of course, you didn't expect any of them to hit the ground running, and neither did. I think you saw Arch obviously pick up the tempo a week later, but over the course of the month, you've seen some uh, pitfalls. He has maybe not performed to what he expected, or maybe what the coaching staff expected. And there's been some bumps along the way because he's making his first couple of starts as the ingrained QB1 for this program. He had to win this job and get comfortable, and he has a ton of new receivers around him. You know that he's obviously developed great chemistry with guys like Parker Livingston, who was a practice squad player last year, getting to throw a lot with Arch, and the chemistry is there. But we both know that chemistry between quarterbacks and receivers with a brand new offensive line sometimes doesn't happen overnight or just during summer and fall practices. Dating back to when Arch was starting as a freshman at Isidore Newman, I remember Coach Nelson Stewart rather, kind of, downplaying even the fact that he was competing for the job as a eighth grader about to be a freshman at Newman, and it was not supposed to be a big deal. But like you said, everything this young man has done from the time he made it to the varsity squad to the time he won the starting job at Newman to the time he was etching his name as the new record setter in every single one of those record books. If you're a Texas fan, you went through 10 or so years of just not even being competitive to now being a perennial not only CFP playoff contender, but potentially a national championship contender. And with Arch on board, you thought that, with this prodigy quarterback, it might be a seamless transition, but much like every other quarterback, and that's exactly what Arch is every other quarterback has an insane amount of skill and proficiency and talent and charisma and drive and potential and upside to potentially be a top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pick. He's just not there yet. And that's why, before the season, everyone is declaring him the Heisman Trophy favorite and the potential number 1 or 2 quarterback that getting selected in next year's draft. And there was a big backlash from, more local people like yourself and I saying, no, don't expect Arch to go into the draft after 1 year of being the starter. But there is also the technical angle that he is not ready. Making that transition from Isidore Newman to a high school football in Louisiana to the SEC, playing Florida in 2 weeks or coming off a game against Ohio State, he might be ready to play Sam Houston State, but it's a big transition to get ready to then play the Florida Gators. As bad as they may be this year, they have a terrific defense, and those are
Yeah.
SEC level defensive linemen and linebackers and DBs that'll play on Sundays. So I think people are, again, lacking patience. I think, we can revisit this conversation maybe this time next month when he's more than halfway through his first season as a starter, but give him time. I trust that all the tools are in the toolbox. I trust the attitude and the drive and the trajectory of Arch Manning. I love that he admitted that he was feeling and he was a little bit living in his own head when he celebrated against Sam Houston State on Saturday night. He shout out Ellen Manning, his terrific mom, who is a sweetheart. Probably gave him some shit about his celebration, but that is great for this young man who has a ton of pressure on his shoulders, has for years and years and years, stuff that you and I could never even actualize or put into words to describe what this young man goes through. So I'm sure it felt great, and you can take that momentum into a fantastic bye week. And I would be surprised if this conversation didn't have a different tune after he beats Florida.
He he continues to handle it extremely well. You talk about the media availability. I don't remember. I guess that was post game or maybe it was Monday or whatever, where he kind of joked, "Yeah, mom didn't like the celebration too much, so I heard about it a little bit." And he handles everything that's thrown his way in such a an admirable way, considering the amount of spotlight that has always been on him. And I always go back to an interview we had when I think he was a sophomore still at Newman, and I asked him if it was a little bit crazy to him, some of the attention that came his way, and he had this kind of like relieved laugh, saying, "Yeah, it is a little bit insane to me that I'm just trying to be Arch and trying to be the best quarterback for my team, and all of this kind of circles around him, oftentimes sooner than it should, or at a pitch or degree more than what it should be at that point." And a lot of that continues with what you mentioned with sort of the draft talk and him as the number one pick in the 26 draft before he ever really took the reins as the starter of his college team. And so, um, again, he continues to handle that well, and that's all really encouraging. He's been the first person to say that he hasn't played up to his standard or been what he needs to be for this team, that they need to play better, and that he's a big part of that. But I remain really optimistic that's going to be the case, and that it's tough to go be an SEC quarterback and get thrown into some of these things for the first time. And I know we're going to kind of weave in some of a conversation from a week or so ago. Our guy Ryan Clark and the guys on the pivot kind of giving some early thoughts on how Arch was performing, and referencing that him not being necessarily a generational talent. And I think there's some fairness to that in terms of he doesn't have the strongest arm we've ever seen. He's not topping the charts in some of these physical tools. He's still really good in a lot of those ways, and good enough to be an NFL quarterback with a lot of the physical tools. But some of the things that have always set Arch apart have been his feel for the game, handle, more of the intellectual side of being the quarterback, which falls right in line with his uncles and some other greats through the years. And so, as much as some folks may look and say, oh, he doesn't have the rocket arm that maybe Bryce Underwood has already, and some of those things, the things that he does have that may take a little bit more time to adjust to the speed and whatnot of the SEC game, I think are still there and still going to serve him really well, not just in the long-term future, but as you mentioned, in the weeks and months to come this year.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought up Bryce Underwood because I was about to extend an invitation to our friend Ryan to come onto the podcast to talk about generational talent because when you compare when you compare someone like Arch Manning, who was the number one quarterback in his class, along ahead of Nico Imaliva and Jackson Arnold, I believe were up there, and then someone like Bryce Underwood, I think it's safe to say that Bryce Underwood might actually be potentially a better quarterback prospect, and I feel pretty comfortable saying that as someone who stood very banged his hands on the desk for Arch Manning as a generational sort of quarterback. And when you look at the skill set that he has, I still think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about this young man. I mean, again, we can talk about his last name, and I think you would be ignorant to not bring up the fact that that is his last name. I think you would be remiss to not bring up that all of his uncles have had struggles before they found their footing. It's quarterback is the most difficult position in all of sports. So to think that it can become so easily, maybe that would quantify that it would be you'd be generational if it was seamless for you to take the reins. But Bryce Underwood didn't look generational against Oklahoma when they were losing, but he does seem to be picking up the pace as his starting experience expands. And I think we can say the same about Arch, who all things considered, is the most athletic Manning to date in his family. He runs 4.4 in the 40, which I think is pretty exceptional for a quarterback of this skill. I think remembering his high school days, and I know he didn't compete in the Elite 11, but from talking to various college coaches and quarterback evaluators, his processing and the delivery, the release of that football, I'm sure you remember, Jared, was, if not the fastest I've ever seen, definitely in there because I tend to forget pretty quickly, and I have never forgotten how quickly and authoritatively Arch can get rid of the football to the right reads, making throws that I didn't think a quarterback could make. And I have sat in the film room with Coach Stewart, and I've seen it firsthand. So I know that he has the skill up here, and of course, physically. To me, I think declaring him a non-generational talent like Ryan did at this stage is just a little bit premature. I think that we can have that conversation if it continues to either stutter or potentially go downhill. But based on his body of work, based on his skill set, and based on his last name and his pedigree and what everyone else in his family has accomplished, I have even more confidence that it will eventually come. And I think the fact that he's done with this with more pressure than any one of his uncles or dad or grandpa, I think that's a testament to the kind of drive you get from these great quarterbacks that maybe aren't last name Manning, but you say this guy was a leader. This guy had the attention of his peers, and his teammates and his coaches and wowed them. I think Arch has all that because of all he's dealt with, and you would never know that by talking to him and the way he conducts himself, which I think is a not only an attribute for an elite quarterback or a leader, but as a human being trying to do all this and accomplish all this.
How many quarterbacks through the years that have either gone on to be, GOAT conversation, we were not looking at their first 4 games as a college starter and saying, man, that guy is a generational talent. I mean, Tom Brady obviously becomes kind of the poster boy for this, but was a late round draft pick, and folks look back at the combine pictures and whatnot and kind of joke about some of that stuff.
You know
Patrick
who was
Mahomes.
really average their first year at LSU was Joe Burrow in 2018. He was very good, but he didn't take the LSU offense by storm. He was like a game manager, right? He was a little bit of an enhanced game manager his first season at LSU before we saw the 2019 LSU football team and all those accolades show up. I don't think you can judge a quarterback in particular, but really any position. But a quarterback is all the spotlight and scrutiny of anyone. I don't think you can make that case after 4 games and say, "Yep, just not that dude." I think that's too premature.
Yeah, we talk all the time about guys' recruiting process is developing at different rates, guys' actual ability and skill sets, whether it be the physical attributes at the high school level or the skill sets as you continue to hone and get more experience, all of that developing at different rates. And we also talk about the fact that quarterback being as tough of a position as there is in team sports, and that's as tough to play as well as tough to evaluate. And so as often is the case, some things could maybe use a little bit more patience than we give them in our modern society, where we want to, order a quarterback from Amazon and have him there at full fledged 5-star ability on the next day delivery sort of thing. But yeah, I think folks that wanted to crown Arch as the number one pick in the draft and the Heisman winner and all those things before the season were premature in that regard. And in the same way, folks that are ready to kind of move on from him and say that he doesn't have it 4 games into his career as the actual starting quarterback at Texas, it's a little bit premature. You mentioned some of the last name dynamic too. I wanted to ask you about that. Trying to project what guys can be, I think there's been some backlash from some Arch critics because of feeling like he was given too much too soon or too much benefit of the doubt because of the last name. But at the same time, with that last name comes a level of track record and a level of resources around him to kind of look at as you project what the future could be. How do you look at some of those family ties and pedigrees, whether it be for Arch or other players through the years that obviously, have had parents or several family members that have gone on to be great college and NFL players, and just what to weigh out of that as you try and gather what you can on who a 16 or 17-year-old football player is and who he can be by the time he's in his early to mid 20s.
That's a great question, and it's great because it allows us to kind of prop up Arch for the expectations that came with his last name, but he's far from the only son or nephew or brother of an NFL player that we have dealt with or that has been present in these recruiting ranks. We're looking at someone like Jalen Brewster right now, the 2027 class, who's the number one defensive tackle in the country. And his dad, Robert Brewster, played for the Cowboys. He played at a high level in college at Ball State and played in the NFL. And you see that his son has a lot of these same physical characteristics that his dad had, except Jalen started playing football at 6 years old, learning from a former NFL defensive tackle, and is now touted as a number one defensive lineman in the country. In the similar regard, Dia Bell, whose father, of course, is Rajah Bell, is a number one quarterback in the 2026 class. His dad played a different sport altogether. But we're talking about those athletic qualities that have translated to the quarterback position, along with plenty of quarterback coaching and tutelage and hard work at his high school coaches and Dia Bell himself, that make him the prospect that had Texas and LSU and Ohio State and others buzzing for Diabell. When it came to Arch, you wanted to say he's great because his uncles are, but it's so much more. We talk about the expectations, but I look at it as how you dealt with those expectations. And you know, I had people in my friend group. I had people that were coworkers of Allison at her elementary school in New Orleans, in Central City. That everyone was doubting Arch. I've actually never seen this because 10 years earlier, it was everyone had to see Leonard Fournette in the city, right? If you hadn't seen Leonard Fournette or even Tyron Johnson a few years later, that was your Friday night or Saturday night plan at some point in the fall, because there was excitement and it was buzz about this prospect in New Orleans that was quote unquote generational. I think Boga for sure, and even Tyron I think counted as the way that he was quantified as a generational sort of prospect, number one in the country. Um, and then with Arch, it was a lot of people doubting him, and I think that came from the last name. If it was Leonard Manning, would they have been doubting how great Booga was, or would they have been propping him up? So I think the fact that they were familiar with his uncles, and obviously everyone in New Orleans knows his grandpa and dad Cooper. I do. Maybe it's because of my therapist session this morning, but I am going to throw the tinge of jealousy potentially. But I think it sets you up for success because he knew that those expectations were going to be there before we did. His family was anticipating this, and we are lauding him for how he's dealt with it. And in fact, he's thrived because of it. He has never let it damper who he is. I think this first month of the college football season is the only time you could even make a semblance of a case that the pressure weighed on Arch to live up to expectations. But it seems, and I'm hoping that what this last win against Sam Houston State, this might have cranked things into ignition, that he can kind of cruise from here on out and keep building. But it's a lot of unfair expectations. It's a lot of unfair pressure. I agree with Ryan that if his name was Arch Fournette, that maybe there wouldn't be the same level of expectation. So when they saw him rewrite Louisiana high school record books and more Isidore Newman record books, and um, put his name amongst the best to ever play at that high school and be a top 1, 2, or 3 recruit in the country, no matter where you look. They didn't ask for that. They got it and they dealt with it. And I think it's more of the public rooting against him. And then if you're a Texas fan, eventually rooting for him and expecting. So it's a lot of mishmash of emotions, but he's kept cool the entire time. And I think eventually that'll be the difference, is he didn't let the good get to him and he hasn't let the bad get to him. And I think that's super important, to be even keel. And that's a cliche that you and I hear all the time on Saturdays and Sundays.
And I think some of that's important to that message to get across, where the pedigree element people look at and say, okay, the athletic traits and some of the stuff you were talking about initially, but growing up around the game at a high level, I think a lot of times what we see from the sons and daughters of professional athletes or former professional athletes, or I mean coaches, anyone who's around the game at that level, what we see as much as anything is a level of maturity and even keelness, professionalism, even at a young age, of how they approach some of these things and handle some of the ebbs and flows, and kind of keep the priorities the main thing, whether or not they maybe stack up over time athletically to what mom or dad did. There seems to be a level of maturity in kind of how they navigate some things, and also in terms of the system around them, having kind of been there and done that at times. It becomes situations where, whether it be the development in the actual game or the handling of the recruiting process, you are not dealing with nearly as much of the overemphasis on the wrong things and concern about the rankings and the timeline of the recruiting. They kind of, it seems like some of that kind of experience, having gone through it, some factors into just the perspective on it in a way that I think is conducive to allowing kids to develop at their own timeline and handle some of these things that get thrown their way that come along. Some of the secondary aspects that come along with all of that as well.
I agree. And the way Arch handled that recruiting process, I think he was very open. I mean, I can't, besides a Destrehan Edna Carr spring game, I can't recall any time I've been at Newman in the spring be as crowded of a public affair as I did when Arch's 4 years there. Every spring, it was college coaches, it was reporters, it was media. And you know what? Even though they handled the media in a different capacity, looking back, and listen, this is coming from someone who complained quite a bit, because a little greedy for access. But I thought they handled it splendidly, and Arch never. I don't think he ever said anything that ever caught my eye in a crazy way. He never gave too much about his recruitment. We heard more from coaches involved that they really felt that he, would go somewhere outside of Texas, and the fact that Georgia was winning two national championships at that time. If they were kind of stuck in where Texas is now, like he could have been the quarterback at Georgia. There was a lot of belief in that, and if Nick Saban wasn't maybe retiring pretty soon, he could have been at Alabama. There was a lot of talk about Will Randall and Arch Manning going to Alabama before he popped to Texas. You have to credit obviously that staff, but more so give credit to the kid who had every single option ahead of him and did what he wanted to do, which that was during the NIL era. And he followed a childhood dream to try to resurrect a program. And even though you obviously cannot credit Arch alone for the re-emergence of Texas over the past half decade, you got to obviously chalk that up to Steve Sarkisian and that fantastic staff. Our boy Brandon Harris, the general manager. But you have to devote part of that to the Arch effect that he has brought so much confidence and excitement to this program. It's definitely factored into their reemergence.
Wanted to mention a couple of other guys too from that 23 quarterback class, because as much as we continue to talk more and more about this 2027 quarterback class in Louisiana over these next couple of years, the comparisons will continue to be back to that group with Arch. But part of what made that 23 group so special is it was in fact a group of really talented guys. And so as we continue to watch Arch find his way there in his role, Eli Holstein, a guy at Zachary High who was fantastic and was right there in the mix at the top of that class, has been fantastic for Pitt. He had a great season last year in 24, has come back this year and improved a lot of those numbers. They're looking downfield that much more, it looks like, from some of the yards per completion and average depth of target and all those things. And yet his completion rate has risen. His touchdown numbers are at a higher pace than what was a good season last year for the Panthers. And so great to see Eli doing his thing up there. And now also in the Northeast with him, Ricky Collins, the former Woodlawn Baton Rouge star who started his college career at LSU. He looks like he's going to be the starter for the Orange the back half of the season after getting some time there following Angeli's injury in the second half against Clemson. Went in and threw a touchdown pass against those Tigers, and now is going to have an opportunity to showcase some of what he can do. And Zay T-Set, who's up at Grambling State now, the former Scotlandville star in that 23 class, has led back-to-back fourth quarter comebacks for the Grambling Tigers. And so looking forward to the rest of the season for Zay and company as that SWAC schedule kicks up here the rest of the way. But again, great 2023 group. We're going to talk some more about some 26, 27, 28 prospects in Louisiana here shortly. But the other big news that we wanted to hit on from a college standpoint is last week we get the ruling from the NCAA Oversight Committee that the spring transfer portal for football will be no more. They'll have one transfer portal window in the winter. They're still kind of figuring out exactly what that time frame is going to be. Some college coaches want to move that into early January, but just kind of initial reactions of what that means to get that spring window off the books, and kind of pros and or cons about doing so.
I just think that it's such a rush that after this entire football season, traditionally, January you saw a flood of new offers originally come out because scouting departments and coaches are hitting film trying to offer in-state, out-of-state targets. But with the influx of the transfer portal window, right in between two signing periods, evaluating the future. Also, a lot of these coaches are either entertaining or considering or looking for other jobs. I just think that listen, we're friends with a lot of coaches, and they are extremely busy. First of all, I mean, also preface it, they make good money because they work their asses off. So I'm all in favor of giving these coaches one less window to worry about trying to do transfers. Let them focus on some of the important things. Here at the Recruit That Boo podcast, we start and end at high school football. Not literally, but like that's where we start. We're high school football passion first. So I agree. Like, it gives coaches a chance to focus on their families, on their high school recruiting, and then they can devote that transfer portal window to one window, which I think will be a little bit easier to manage because, like, I think I don't want to speak for you, but certainly my head starts to spin when I look at all these different windows, and I certainly forget about a window or a period annually. So I think for the sake of these coaches who have families and other things to do, this is in their best interest, especially to get this thing fine tuned moving forward.
And I think most of the movement was occurring in the winter anyway, at least looking, I mean, just anecdotally at this LSU class. Obviously, the vast majority of that hay was in the barn in the winter portal window, and then just a couple of late additions there in the spring. But I know some coaches have worried about, as much as we talk about just sort of the management of all of these moving pieces all the time, and how difficult it is to kind of maintain a roster and make sure you're at your best for your team when there's so much fluidity to that roster throughout the year. I know having an end of spring window for some college programs kind of stressed them about how they wanted to go about even handling spring practice, and would a guy maybe not winning a job outright coming out of the spring mean they're going to bounce and hop in the portal before the summer, or is a peer institution going to be watching your spring practices and monitoring, okay, is what's happening in this spring game? Can we maybe talk a kid into getting into the portal and coming over here if we feel like there's an opportunity to kind of leverage there? And so there was a lot of chaos to that spring dynamic that I think a lot of the college coaches feel like will be kind of answered or mitigated by getting that window out of the mix and just focusing on the winter.
No, I agree. I think I'm all for it, and if we have to readjust, I'm all for that too.
Let's talk about some of these high school guys. We'll start with the seniors. Not a ton of fresh news to kind of get into, but a couple of guys worth noting. Dylan Berryman, the Texas committed defensive lineman, will be at Ole Miss this weekend for LSU at Ole Miss. I know the Rebels have continued to try to make a push with him. Actually, maybe we'll hit on three guys, because as I'm talking about the Rebels, I'm realizing the Rebels have been kind of quietly in the mix of Jamarcier Plater's recruitment, the commitment to Wake Forest, who Colorado came in and offered. The Rebels have been monitoring. They're going to kind of keep an eye on Jamarcier. And then a guy that we've talked about a bunch, Cole Bergeron, the STM quarterback, committed to Virginia Tech. There's a coaching change now, obviously, at Virginia Tech. So he's someone worth monitoring. Some other schools are kind of checking in and gauging his commitment level to the Hokies and kind of where some things stand there. It sounds like Cole remains, focused on being in Blacksburg at the next level right now, but it's still September, and so some of that could develop. What is on any of those guys? What's kind of your latest feel or what you're hearing on whether you should start considering any of them kind of flip watch candidates, or if the Longhorns, Demon Deacons, and Hokies should feel pretty well positioned?
Yeah. As far as Cole goes, I think they're evaluating the Virginia Tech situation. I think that they were, I don't want to say they were caught completely off guard by the dismissal of Brent Pry, but they're not much like taking their time to commit when they did before Cole's senior season in August. They're not going to rush to reopen their recruitment or anything until they're confident of the next spot. Colorado has been a team that's reached out. I know a few other programs are continuing to stay in touch with the Bergerons. I don't anticipate that Cole will end up signing a Virginia Tech, barring Um, Barring another, a really home run hire that might have a connection. I know that Colorado has been in touch with Cole. I'm not so sure that they're after him so hard. They certainly are after Braden Allen, the terrific Tulane commit from LCA, who will be officially visiting Boulder this weekend. They are certainly making a push for Jamarcia Plate?
Plater,
Platter?
play. How
Platter.
did you how did
I
you
just,
French up the er on the end of it?
I just say platter. I've never wanted to say plater. I don't know why. I think it's because of the Jamarcia. I feel like it just doesn't. It sounds right.
Uh,
I love his first name, so I kind of just call him Jamarcia. Never had to say his last name until now. Colorado is making a tremendous push for Jamarcia. He is canceled. He was originally going to OV Boise State this weekend. Instead, he will take an OV on November 1st to Boulder. Colorado is the team working hardest to move Jamarcia off of his Wake Forest pledge, and I think they have some serious traction in that department. And then Dylan Berryman will return to Ole Miss. He's been to Austin twice in the last month. He'll be making his second visit to Oxford this Saturday for the second time this month. Talking to people in his recruitment, told he's just visiting with some friends. He's happy to be there. He likes the Ole Miss staff, but he is very comfortable with Texas. I tend to believe that until I'm not supposed to. Um, yeah.
and then I mentioned referencing a couple of 27, 28 prospects that have started to gain some traction. We talked a little bit last week about Jules Baptiste from Edna Carr as kind of a notable 27 edge rusher that we'd watched seen some of behind the scenes, and now he's getting his opportunity and is starting to look that part, and more big Power Four programs are starting to take notice of Baptiste in that junior class currently in Louisiana. Another guy to put in that conversation, Bryson Phoenix up there at Alexandria Senior High, who is a guy that I saw. I think it was literally like 2 clips of like a fall scrimmage or something 2 years ago when he was still at Pineville, and then he's had to kind of be patient and wait through a transfer eligibility year, and being banged up a little bit at one point. But now that he's out there on Friday nights, varsity action for the Trojans, he is, I would say, exceeding some of my expectations, and I had already been penciling him in as a potential Power Four guy, and slotting him in my 30 to 40 range tentatively before getting a chance to see it on Fridays. But he's looking really good out of the gate through 3 games for the Trojans, and someone that a lot of colleges have started to extend offers, Liberty being the most recent on, I believe it was Tuesday night, extended the offer, but Tulane and the Cajuns and some others around the state, as well as others around the country. And I know we had a chance to watch some of those early cut-ups this weekend of some of what he was doing, and his size at 6'2", 6'3", and I think pushing up toward 240, and his closing speed and all of those things. He's a really, really intriguing prospect. Early thoughts from you on Bryson, and just what you've seen from him so far in these first few weeks, or what you're hoping to see from him now moving forward as he establishes himself as a notable 2027 prospect in the state.
Yeah, well, you already know I'm a big fan of this Alexandria team. I'm excited to see how he fares in some of these bigger games. We know that he just got the chance to play Destrehan. That's a team that's going to be well prepared for him. You're looking for a prospect where I'm not as familiar with Bryson. You want to see how he fares in these tougher opponent games, and seeing what he did against Destrehan. You know that now they're dipping into their district schedule, and definitely would not be surprised if we continue to hear his name. Whether it's with some of the in-state programs, or potentially even a higher level program, depending on how the season closes out.
The district is always fun. When they get into this back half of the season, Alexandria will have opportunities against West Monroe, Ruston, Neville, and company. And so, just what that October slate holds, and I guess into early November, you'll get a great sense of kind of where Bryson is, and where a lot of these Trojans are at this point. Folks wondered, from afar, if they weren't as familiar with some of the young talent coming through Alexandria. JT Lindsay and that great senior class in 25 graduated, and folks were eager to see where would Alexandria be overall. But Some great talent, 26, 27, 28 classes. Jaden Bayonne and Bryson have been picking up a lot of steam as defensive standouts in that 27 class. Love the quarterback to receiver duo in Carson Sellers and Alex Fontenot, and they've got two young running backs in 28, Kason Williams and Noble Williams, who I think are going to be real, real good as we start to see more and more of that class. And the other guy that we really wanted to talk about, whose recruitment has started to pick up, another top 2028 running back prospect in this Louisiana class that we talked about just a few weeks ago, Dalen Powell, who up at Ruston has now added his Louisiana Tech and Grambling State offers, the two hometown, home parish programs kicking off his recruiting process. But he looks like someone that we're going to be talking about for the next 2.5 years of high school and obviously beyond. Early thoughts on him and his recruiting process starting to pick up a little steam here early.
Yeah, nobody has beat you, my friend, on the Dalen Powell train, and I'm putting myself in the front row. Not only have I seen on tape just the kind of runner he is at a young age, the fact that these schools are jumping on early, the fact that I've gotten texts or calls or, hey, have you seen this kid? What do you think of this kid? So much since you put him on my radar, what, 3 or 4 weeks ago. The stock is climbing tremendously quickly. I know that LSU has already, I think, hosted him. Talking to some folks up in Ruston. I mean, listen, Ruston just had a fantastic run with their quarterback Josh Brantley and with Aiden Anding doing everything on defense and special teams and offense. And now they have a team with the number one tight end in the country, an elite safety in Jaden Anding, and people are still buzzing about Dalen Powell, this 2028 running back. He is the next wave of this Ruston talent. He is already a central force of this program. If and when Ruston is playing in the Dome again, I got a feeling that it won't just be me, you, and a couple of coaches now talking about Dalen Powell. He would be a household name going into his junior season should he continue on this current pace that he's on. But you were on him first, Jared. We got to give you your props. You have to. And I'm excited that we revisit this conversation in a month or so, how many offers he has or how many eyes are on him at that point in the season.
Same district as we mentioned with Bryson Phoenix and those guys up in Alexandria. And so 2-5A is an awful lot of fun, and it'll be fun to watch Dalen and the Bearcats as they get into that stretch and have to deal with Alexandria, Neville, West Monroe and company. I need to find my way to a couple of those games because those matchups are always really fun. I'll actually get a chance to see Neville this weekend against the aforementioned Cole Bergeron down here in Lafayette, Neville versus STM. And so that'll be a lot of fun here for a week 4 matchup. But just kind of bringing it all back together and tying in some of that arch conversation with some of this too. Folks get really stressed out about timelines and want to see too much happen too quickly and compare themselves and maybe get jealous of other people's timelines. I don't know how often we can say essentially just let your process be your process, trust your own process. Despite the fact that we're talking about some 27 and 28 guys starting to blow up, realize that they're kind of the headliners early on of some of these classes, and that if you're a 27 or 28 prospect, or you're the parent of a 27 or 28 prospect right now and you're getting antsy wondering, man, like, am I okay? I haven't seen my recruitment take off and all of those things. Just relax and let it come as it does. Focus on the main things, keep the main things, and prioritize your development and doing what you can for your team in the fall, and then being where you can to compete at a high level in the spring and summer with some of these camp opportunities and whatnot. But don't start losing your mind because Dalen Powell has his first couple of offers. Your time will come when your time is ready to come.
I feel like a broken record, but it is certainly warrants the public service address. There is no perfect timeline for a recruitment or a recruiting process. Every recruiting process is different, much like a star, Jarrett. They are all unique. Doesn't mean that any is right or any is wrong. Each is unique to the kid and the parents and the people going through the process, and they all yield similar results when it's all said and done. And no one, when they arrive in college, asks what your recruiting process was like. Nobody asks what you were ranked or how many offers you had, or really how many committable offers you had by the time you committed. It is all even keel once it starts. As long as you get there, it's not a, how well did you do? It's, did you get the job done? And I'm all for that.
No doubt. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser. We thought it was going to be a short episode. Then we talked about Arch Manning for 25 minutes. And so some things changed and audible there on the fly. And appreciate y'all for tuning in, as always, to Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit That Boot. Until next time, y'all be well out there.